Settlers of Catan is a 3 to 4 player board game. The game board is made up of hexagonal tiles. Each tile represents a resource that is used in gameplay. The light green tile represents sheep. The card's background is the same as the tile. The dark green tile represents wood. The yellow tile represents wheat. The red tile represents brick. The gray tile represents ore. The beige tile represents the desert. There is only one desert and it produces no resources. When setting up the board, you randomly place the tiles. First, make a row of 5 across. Then make 2 rows that are 4 across, one above and one below the row of 5 tiles. Then make 2 rows that are 3 across, one above and one below the row of 4. There are 3 different pieces a player can build: a road, a settlement, and a city. To build these pieces, you spend resources. There are 5 resources: wood, sheep, wheat, brick, and ore. Each player will have a card letting them know the costs of each piece a player can build. To build a road, a player must have a wood and a brick. To build a settlement, a player must have a sheep, a wood, a brick, and a wheat. To build a city, a player must first have a settlement. Once a player has a settlement, a player may upgrade a settlement to a city with 3 ore and 2 wheat. A player may also buy a development card for a sheep, an ore, and a wheat resource card, but the purpose of these cards will be explained later. A player may also trade in 4 resource cards for one other resource card of their choice. For example, if a player would like to build a road, he or she needs a brick and a wood. In this case, the player only has 4 sheep and a wood. This player may trade his or her sheep resource cards for 1 brick card at a 4-for-1 rate. After the trade, the player now has 1 brick and 1 wood and can now build the road. There are also ports. If a player is built on a port, then the player can trade for a new resource card at a reduced rate. This port lets the player pay 3 of any resource card for 1 other resource card. The player could also be built on specific ports. If a player is built on this port, a player can trade 2 sheep resource cards for 1 of any other resource card. These tiles go around the board that you have already built, alternating a port tile with a plain water tile. Notice that the board has number tiles. Notice that each number tile has a letter and a number of dots. The dots show how likely a number is to be rolled. The more dots, the better. The player now places the numbers in alphabetical order in a spiral on the board. Notice no number tile is placed on the desert. This is because the desert does not produce any resources. A player collects resource cards by having a settlement built on a tile when the tile's number is rolled. For an example, let's look at this wheat tile, which has the number 8 on it. You will notice that both white and red have a settlement built along the border of this tile. You should also notice that white also has a city based along the border of this tile. Also, you should be able to see that the sticks built between the settlements and the cities are roads. Because these players are built along the edge of this hex, they will receive resources whenever an 8 is rolled. Specifically in this case, whenever an 8 is rolled, a red will receive 1 wheat resource card because of the settlement he or she has built along the border of this hex. In addition, white will also receive wheat cards for being built along the border of this hex. In fact, white will receive 1 wheat card for the settlement and 2 wheat cards for the city that this player has built along the border of this hex. 3 wheat cards in total. All other tiles produce resource cards in the same way, matching the dice throw. It is also important to remember that all players collect resources with each dice roll, regardless of whose turn it is. Players may receive several cards at one time. For this 8, white will collect 3 wheat cards and red will collect 1. If you have looked closely at the board, you may have noticed that there are no number chips with the number 7, so no resources are collected when a 7 is rolled. Instead, when a 7 is rolled, the robber comes into play. The player who rolled the 7 may move the robber onto any tile he or she chooses. In this case, the robber has been placed on a 10 sheep tile. Once the robber is placed, the player who placed the robber may now steal 1 card at random from the hand of any player who is built along the border of the tile. If more than one player has built along the border of the tile, the player who rolled the robber may choose which player to steal a card from. In this case, the player may steal from orange or white, since they are both built along the border of the 10 sheep on which the robber was placed. In addition, when a 7 is rolled, any player with more than 7 cards in his or her hand must discard half of his or her cards. The goal of the game is to get 10 points, and there are several ways to accumulate points. One of the major ways to accumulate points is that the pieces you build oftentimes are worth victory points. For example, a settlement is worth 1 victory point. Each city you have built is also worth 2 victory points. A player can also accumulate victory points through building roads. The first player to have a minimum of 5 road segments connected is considered to have longest road. In this picture, blue has more than 5 roads connected. Blue has 6 connected roads. Because of this fact, the player receives the longest road card, which is worth 2 victory points, although it is not necessarily permanent. For any player that creates a longer road would receive the card and the 2 victory points. In this case, blue has 6 roads. In order for another player to take longest road and the 2 victory points, the player would need to have 7 connected roads. White could do this by building 4 roads, connecting the roads already built. If the player did this, then white would receive the longest road card and the 2 victory points. Another way to accumulate victory points is by purchasing development cards. When a player purchases one of these cards, he or she draws the top card. This card may be played on the player's next turn, but only at the rate of 1 card per turn. These cards can help you accumulate victory points in a couple of ways. This is because development cards do a variety of things. Some of these cards are victory points themselves. By merely buying the card, you receive the victory card. What each card does is specified on the card. The most common development card is a soldier. If a player plays a soldier, it allows the player to place the robber and steal a resource card from the player built along the border of that tile, just like a 7 would. A player who manages to purchase and play 3 soldier development cards is considered to have the largest army. This gains him or her the card pictured and 2 victory points. Any player who surpasses the current player with the most soldier cards receives the largest army card, much like longest road. Now that you have set up the board and understand how to collect resource card, the game begins. The game begins with each player rolling the dice, and the player with the highest number goes first. Each player begins by placing a settlement, starting with the player who rolled the highest and continuing clockwise. When the player plays a settlement, the player also plays a road to go with each settlement the player has placed. Each settlement must be 2 road lengths away from all other settlements. Each player places a settlement and a road, then the player who placed the last settlement places a second settlement, and then each other player places an additional settlement and a road in the opposite order than they originally placed. Then the game begins. Each player rolls, all players collecting every roll, and the player whose turn it is building if he or she wishes to. In addition, on a player's turn, he or she may trade his or her cards with any player he wishes. However, the other players may only trade with the player whose turn it currently is. Trade with the other players, trade in with ports, collect resources, build settlements, roads, and cities, buy development cards, get 10 points, win the game, play Catan.